So I got the upper control arms on Saturday. This is Wednesday, first nice day that I felt I could come down and work comfortably in the shop. They appear to be pretty high quality. They are from SPC. They've got a diagram of the parts here that I'll be referencing as I make these adjustments. And I'm going to go over them step by step. And the first thing says to adjust the SPC adjustable control arm to approximate original equipment dimensions. The control arm leg integrated with the ball joint housing should be the rearward leg, and the clamping leg of the control arm should be forward. So, this is the clamping leg. That's forward. It's going to go on the car like this. That is going to be the driver or left side. If that was in the frame, I'm going to show the clamping arm again because it has a pinch bolt here. This is the, how they call it, the, I guess the integrated ball joint housing. So now we've identified left versus right. I'm going to get left out of the way, and we're going to focus on the right for now. So I've got the original equipment control arm there from the right side, and I wish the manufacturer would give me a clue as to what the best way to measure this is. Because you're trying to measure two different things. I guess I'm going to try, although I can't rotate that easily. I guess I can take it to the vise and rotate it vertical. Maybe to measure center of the ball joint to the two centers of the connecting points. That's what I'm going to do. I don't know if that's right. They didn't give me any information. So I'm going to take the original over to the vise and rotate that mounting bracket here, the cross shaft, and rotate it so that I'll have a closer measurement. Okay, so I've got that more or less vertical, and here's another thing about how they ship this, and they don't even talk about this till later on. See how that can move? Later on they want you to tighten these bolts so that you can rotate this by hand but not torque it down. So the other thing that does with this being loose, if you watch these stops that are on the shaft, as I move these, that's probably going to slightly change the distance here. So one of the first things I'm going to do is I'm going to tighten up these bolts. They appear to be nylock washers, or no, they're not nylock. They're actually the type that the threads are dented, if you will, so that they don't back out off. So I'm going to have to find a socket that fits that. I'm going to take it to the vise. I will clamp this part in the vise, and I will tighten these ends to pull those both in. Why they don't deliver them with those nuts tightened is beyond me, but that's not the only thing that I haven't liked so far about this whole thing. So I've got that in the vise, and it was hard to clamp. I had to clamp it by the part where the bolt goes through, because otherwise it was just spinning out of my protective jaw things on the vise. But take note that it doesn't go all the way up against this stop before you can't move it anymore. I had to back it off a little bit, and that's showing some resistance. Now I'm going to tighten the other side, and before I forget, it is a 7/8 inch nut that you're tightening, and because it's one of those locking types, it actually requires a bit of effort to crank that down. I didn't want to use the ratchet on, or the impact wrench on it, but well, they could have come up with a better way of doing this in the factory. Okay, that is movable by hand. It's, oh, hold on, it's not even on. The nut's not engaged. It's just the resistance from the first side that's actually causing it to be tight. We got a ways to go. So it does take a bit of effort. And it's getting really tight, so I'm going to back it off just a hair. And that's movable by hand. Okay, so that's, I guess, my number one complaint about what they could have done better at the factory. Now I got to try to measure it. So what I'm trying to do as best I can is measure from the middle of this grease fitting to the middle of this mount. And it's not going to be rocket science. It's about 10 inches. Now, it's not going to be accurate anyways, because when this was on the car, there was, I think, 1 shim here and 4 or 5 over here. So the shims are what I'm trying to eliminate. Okay, and the mounting part that this mounts on is inboard of that. So this shaft would be further towards the middle of the car once the shims are in than that. On the new ones, you're trying to eliminate the shims. So there might be up to a ½ inch difference or so between original equipment and the tubular ones. So as I went to try to adjust this, the jam nut was tight up against the adjuster. It said the jam nut is 1 1/8 inch. And it is. The actual adjusting nut is probably 1 3/16 or something like that. 1 1/8 is the biggest open-end wrench I have. So I'm hoping that my large crescent wrench opens up that big. So fortunately, my large crescent wrench did go that far, and I was able to loosen the jam nut. It wasn't stuck very tight, but if you recall, I measured 10 inches from the grease fitting center to the center of where the mounting bolt goes through. This looks like about 9 3/8 right now, but recall there were almost where did that come from? Okay, that's the pinch bolt that holds these on here. None of this stuff is tightened very tight. It's all got the nylock inserts in the nuts and stuff like that, and they just put them on as far as they would go by hand. So stuff's falling out on me. So we're at about 9 3/8. We need to open that up some more. I want to shoot for maybe 9 5/8 to 9 3/4 because I'm making up for those shims. That took it about to a half. And again, this is just going to be close to the original equipment. Tighten it just a little bit. Okay, and then you're going to lock these jam nuts down. One of them is reverse threaded because in order for this to spread the length of the arm here, this has to be, when you turn it one direction, it's got to be going out from both sides. So they are opposite threaded. So I'm tightening the jam nuts up. Now these are not to spec because there's going to have to be alignment adjusted. So I don't know. And you actually couldn't get a torque wrench on these things. Anyway, because torque wrenches typically have a socket, and you can't get a socket on that. So that is an approximate adjustment on, let's see, that is the rearward part of the thing. So now I have to make sure those are loose, go take a measurement from the original equipment as best I can on the other leg of it, and go from there. Okay, the measurement on the front leg was about 10 1/8 inches, so this needs to be expanded as well. That is right about 10 right there, and it had a shim in it, so we're going to call that one good. Tighten these both at the same time so that the sleeve doesn't move. Okay, again, tighten but not so tight that it's going to be a hassle to get them off when it's on the car and we're trying to do an alignment. So the last thing I did prior to taking this over to the car is these pinch bolts that hold these arms in place. I tightened them up just enough to take all the slack out. I didn't tighten them to spec. You do that after it's on the car. Actually, I think I could make a case for it should be done after you're done aligning. But they don't say that in the directions. So that one's ready to go. Before I start to put them on the car, I am going to set up the other one, and as usual, I'm not going to show you that one unless I come across some brilliant idea to make it easier or something that causes me to have issues. Oh, wait a minute, there is one more thing. I have to get my piece of paper because further down in the instructions, after you've got it mounted, and you can see it on the picture here, it says no gap here, and it's pointing to the intersection between the ball joint, what do they call it, the ball joint housing and the clamp leg with the pinch bolt. Now, they tell you to put a pry bar between your spindle and the bottom of that to make sure there's no gap there. I am going to try, since I have it off, I'm going to try to close that gap with the vise. So I do have that in the vise. I was able to close that gap. I'm going to see if I can position the camera where you can see it. So right in here, I'm trying to get something skinny to point with because my finger's kind of fat. Don't have anything, but right in here, I'm going to loosen the vise and you'll see that gap open up. Or maybe you won't, because now that I crunched it in, it's staying crunched, it's staying closed. So, but I was able to close that gap very easily with the vise. It seems to me that that's a better plan than trying to hold the pry bar between the spindle and thing and get this wrench on here, which is not the easiest thing to tighten. It seems to me that that pinch nut is not tight yet. I'm going to have to see if I can get it in a different way. I'm trying not to mar the finish on my nice brand new upper control arms, so I've got the pads on the vice jaws, and it's not holding it very well. Let's see. Getting a little afraid to tighten this any further. There's a metal plate in here. It's still loose. I I don't know what kind of torque that nut can take. See if they have a torque spec in their directions. Next, I guess you haven't seen much of what I was doing there, but I was simply trying to tighten that pinch bolt. You can see the end of it here. There's this little piece right here. I don't know if you can see it wiggling on the. See if I can get in there closer. Camera's not in the same line of sight as my eye. I'll never find it that way. Right back here, maybe I need to go the other way. There it is. Right back here is a little tab that the pinch bolt goes through it. And I guess the idea is to hold that down once you've got the pinch bolt tightened. But it seemed to be, I was putting a lot of pressure on that and wasn't tightening any further, but I didn't want to snap it due to over torquing it. So I'm going to find out what the torque spec is for that and find a torque wrench that's got that range and tighten her up. Okay, I finally found the spec on the pinch bolt. It is 36 pounds per foot, or as most people say, foot-pounds. Just from experience, I think it's that tight already. I'm going to make sure it's at least that tight with the torque wrench. And there it is. And that little plate that I was showing you is loose. So I followed their instructions. I will have to go do some research online, maybe go to their question and answer page and find out whether or not that is supposed to be loose. But the passenger side setup is done. I'm going to go set up the driver's side and get back whenever it's time to install.